and mostly courthouses. And the reason is because we just got some amazing new artifacts from the courthouse. But as you can see, like many counties, Jackson County played musical seats before they finally settled on one, thankfully Maquoketa. And in 1879, History of Jackson County, they talked about keeping track of the county seats in Jackson County as being a little bit like trying to keep track of the post office address of a Methodist circuit rider. I thought that was an apt description. So Milt Cornelius from Andrew wrote a neat little summary kind of what happened in our neck of the woods. This includes Jackson County back in the day. So as you know, in 1803, Thomas Jefferson, President Jefferson, bought this vast amount of land from France called the Louisiana Purchase. And you all know that we were part of that. And then the purchase we know of as Iowa, in 1804 included the Indiana Territory. In 1807, we became part of the Illinois Territory. In 1812, we became part of the Missouri Territory. So things fluctuated. And it was kind of funny to me because in 1821, Missouri became a state. So there no longer was a Missouri Territory. And then they called Iowa a political orphan because we didn't belong to anybody for a while. Then finally in 1834, we were included with the Michigan Territory. So we got around. Okay, so although the United States had bought the Louisiana Purchase from the Sac and Fox Indians, and they owned it, of course those Indians had been here, those Native Americans had been here a long time before any white man, and they claimed the land. And it was recognized that they had a legitimate claim. Of course, the Black Hawk War was fought, part of that, and we ended up being part of the Black Hawk Purchase, where kind of among other things, there was a 50-mile strip of land right down through Jackson County that was, or including Jackson County, what is Jackson County, that was set aside. And that strip of land, governmentally, was divided, was split into two counties. Des Moines, but don't think of Des Moines out west. Des Moines and Dubuque. And then in 1836, Iowa came under the jurisdiction of the Wisconsin Territory, and Dubuque County at that time was split into 3 smaller counties, and one of those was Jackson County. Then in 1838, Iowa became its own territory. So we were part of the Iowa Territory. And Iowa Territory, of course, had its own central government. And then finally, in 1846, Iowa was admitted to the Union as the state of Iowa. So that's kind of our story. And I think that Milt Cornelius, thankfully, broke that down and made it a little easier to understand. So there was the Louisiana Purchase, the Indiana Territory, the Illinois Territory, the Missouri Territory. We were an orphan. And then the Michigan Territory, the Black Hawk Purchase, Wisconsin Territory, Iowa Territory, and finally, we were a state. So we have, as you can see, my little chart up here that used to work for us, we finally realized that there are no exact dates for the part that's in gold. I spent a lot of time talking to people at the courthouse yesterday, and nobody knows kind of the exact dates. They just kind of all merged together, I guess, of when things moved back and forth between Andrew and Bellevue is what we're talking about. So Don was able to find me this picture. There's no photograph of the first courthouse. And this is a proposal of the proposed courthouse that was eventually built. So after the Black Hawk Purchase, we had these 2 counties that were divided into Lynn, Jones, and Jackson, okay, by the legislature of the Territory of Wisconsin. Bellevue became very important because Bellevue was made the county seat for all 3 of those counties. And that's why in 1838, Jackson became a county before Iowa was even a state. And that always puzzled me. How could we be a county before there was even a state? But we were. And the first courts were held there, and the county commissioners met there for many years. And the first was in a log courthouse. We have no pictures of that. And then this brick courthouse was built, and it was used off and on until 1861. So this is the old courthouse in Bellevue. Sitting back there in the woods, and it is on the National Register, and it's called the Old Courthouse on the National Register, even though, as you can see, it's been a school for many years. Karen Brown told me she spent many years in that building.
I did.
Going to school there.
Had great wide steps when you first walked in.
Did it?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And then as you went to the back, it had another set just like it. They were probably, I don't know, 10 foot wide or better.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty.
I bet. So here's a better, closer up picture. But remember, that was the first courthouse. Well, the log cabin was first, but that was our first brick courthouse. And there's a sign that the DAR placed there in 1979, marking the spot. It's on the National Register. And just a very important building. It's still a schoolhouse, right? Mm-hmm. To this day. Okay. Well, in all of the courthouses that have kind of come and gone, there are artifacts, beautiful artifacts. You know, museums are all about artifacts. So what you're seeing here is our little exhibit over in the museum on the fairgrounds of the Jackson County courthouses, right? And so we have some really, really, I think, really, really neat things. We know that these things were in the earliest courthouse, and they've been moved from courthouse to courthouse to courthouse, and finally came to us. And I have to tell you this story because you see these cases right here. Well, these were stored in the basement of our present courthouse until a few years ago, and there'd been a lot of construction going on, and they were covered with white powder. And I think it was sanding of drywall and that sort of thing, but they were just covered with white powder. And the courthouse said, "Do you want these?" Well, of course we want these. So they brought them down, and I spent a long time cleaning these. I have to tell you, I've always wanted to be an archaeologist, right? I made a discovery, and I think it was in this drawer right here, perhaps. Way in the back, as I pulled these drawers out and I was cleaning, I found an envelope. And I opened it was way, way back in there. And as I opened up the envelope, I was so excited. I found this. And actually, I brought them over. And they're hanging there. The actual ones I found are hanging there. What this is, and I don't know why this is so exciting to me, I'm sorry. These are 3 petitions from way back in the day, of different groups of people in early Jackson County that were petitioning the supervisors and powers to be to have the first road that was being built through Jackson County run through their neighborhood, right? And so 3 different groups of people wanted this, you know, to come to them. So these were those 3 petitions. Well, it seemed to me that if they donated that wonderful file cabinet, they donated what was in it, right? So I never gave those back, and they are hanging right up there. If you want to take a closer look, they have some very impressive signatures on them, like John Bell of Bellevue, and things like this. They're really, really pretty interesting. So,
Where did it go?
I'm sorry?
Who won?
You know, I really don't know which one won.
Which
but
one was it?
I really don't know. And first of all, the reading is a little hard to read, as you can see. And I don't really know which one won, but it just was such an interesting thing. So there are the petitions. And in fact, the whole file cabinet was named on the drawers. Let me go back. Not good at going back. On these drawers, all of these are labeled with dates. And most of them say road maps. Some of them say old road maps. Some of them say older road maps. But they were all, you know, very legal papers, trifold. You know, they always had they were always trifolds. And so they're over there for you to look at. And I just was excited. So that's as close as I ever came to finding a dinosaur. That was those were my fossils right there, and I was excited. Anyway, thank you to Pat Gent and Kara and all the people that work over there. We have a beautiful exhibit of old things that came from the very oldest courthouses. So, I was also excited, when this happened. So, a week ago, Friday maybe, we got a call from the courthouse saying, you know what, we have a lot of books that we are going to have to dispose of, and would the Historical Society like to have any of these? And so I said, well, I'm sure we would. Could you drop them off? Not realizing how many there are. And I was talking to Josh Kilberg, who is the new, what would we call him?
Well,
Custodian?
he took over for Marty.
Right, so he kind of runs the
Maintenance
of the courthouse. So he said, well, you know, maybe you should come and take a look. So I asked Don to go with me, and we went to the courthouse. And in this small room, really small room, on all three sides were just books, shelves and shelves and shelves of books. And there was a dumpster waiting outside. All these books were going in the dumpster because they didn't have room for them anymore. They're not used anymore because all of this material is online, right? And any judge or any attorney that's going to go back to do research on these books is going to look online instead of, you know, poring over these. So Don and I looked at these and decided that the set that you see kind of here appeared to be the oldest set, the most interesting to us. And they were really three versions, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will. three versions of the same thing, right, by three different companies. And so these are the ones that we chose. And I'm really excited about this, as you could tell. And I brought three books over to show you, and you can come up and look at them. This is what they look like. And book number one, I'm getting ahead of myself here, I'll get this all mixed up. So book number one, and I have to thank, okay. So Josh Kilberg, and I believe his cousin Bob Kilberg, I believe, they were so kind and so helpful to us. They took all the books that we told them we wanted, they put them in plastic containers, and they not only did all that for us, but they delivered them to the other museum and carried them in for us. And that was a huge help. So you see the books here, and here you see our trusty volunteer working on these books and trying to figure out exactly what do we have, exactly what is this, exactly, and putting them in order and getting everything figured out. And I know now that when you want something done, you call a librarian. Kathy Bailey has been a librarian her career, as has Sarah Jones, and you know all the things that Sarah Jones does for us. They just know how to get things figured out and things done. So you see Kathy here, she worked 2 days, right? She worked 2 days figuring out what we had here so that we could even begin to talk about them and we could see what the value of these are to excuse me, to our little collection of things in the world. And we decided that these are really important for us to keep. They're wonderful. So I have to tell you just about two of them, okay? And I only know this because Kathy taught me. She figured it out because I never would have. Okay, this is the first book, and it says Morris Volume 1. They're awesome books. And so in Volume 1, this is cases of the Supreme Court of Iowa, okay, the briefs and the actual cases that went to the Supreme Court of Iowa. And this one is really interesting. The cases go back to 1839. And I thought, wow, we were the territory of, this is really exciting. So in my little brain, I saw this book as being in the first log cabin, right? And that people were poring over this research by candlelight, figuring out, you know, using this legal research. So Kathy quickly burst my bubble, and she said, not exactly the way it is. Though the cases go back to 1839, the books themselves, this book itself wasn't printed until 1877. Oh, this one was 1882. But by the time any of these books were actually published, and she explained to me how long it took for the court system to gather these cases from around Iowa and get them all in some kind of form that they could be actually published into a book and dispersed to the people who needed them. So it was a long time in between. So no, our books were not in the first courthouse, even the couple that we've seen, but they were in our old courthouse. But I just wanted to read you a little bit about what it says about this first book. Well, first of all, I want to show you. So thank you so much to Kathy for doing it. She spent so much time. Okay, hopefully, because I'm sure that you all remember every word that you hear at a brown bag lunch. I'm sure that you all remember about Platt Smith when we talked about Platt Smith. And Platt Smith is the man that Platt Street in Maquoketa is named after. And if you weren't here, you couldn't remember. So if you weren't here, he came to Maquoketa as a teenager. He could not read, he could not write. He lived on the little cabin at the historic corner of Main and Platt Street with J.E. Goodnow and his family. That's where he was as a teenager. But under J.E. Goodnow's influence and getting to know the who of the people that were in Maquoketa at that time, he taught himself to read and write. And there was a very famous case that came along, and it was a land claim case, because everybody was jumping everybody else's claim because people were just moving in. And Platt Smith agreed to represent him in court. He had no legal training at all, but he agreed to represent him in court. And he did such a fantastic job that this court case became really famous. And his name and reputation immediately grew. So he went to Bellevue, and in Bellevue he read under the one attorney that at this time was in our Jackson County area, and he became an attorney. And he was so good at what he did that he ended up moving to Dubuque, and his law career just took off, and he was one of the only people that I see from Jackson County that was ever admitted to practice before the Supreme Court of Iowa. So his name is in many of these books, and I think that's just real, as is J. Goodnow's. So I just think, this is really neat. The early books, there's a lot of those books as you saw in the cart. The early books are important to us, I think, because Iowa was very sparsely populated at that time. So naturally, the preponderance of cases were cases in our area. When we get down to some of the later books in 1916, 1920, whatever, the state was way more populated, and so not so much local history is in them. Anyway, that was, to me, exciting. So I have to tell you one more thing about this very first book from the territory of Iowa, and that's the very first case in this book in 1839, and the name of the case, they're always somebody versus somebody. Well, the name of this case was Ralph, parentheses, a colored man on habeas corpus. That's the name of the case. So as I read the case, there was a Montgomery who was a slave owner from Missouri, and he allowed his slave, and gave him paperwork, allowed his slave to move to the territory of Iowa. And Ralph came here and worked, and he was supposed to send this man $550 plus interest. Well, as time went along, and we don't know the reason, he never sent the money. He was not able, I suppose, to raise the money to send the money. So our friend Mr. Montgomery tried to reclaim his slave and get his slave back because he didn't get his money. But the Supreme Court of the territory of Iowa said, oh no, we are a free territory, and this man is standing on our soil, therefore he is a free man. And so Ralph never had to go back to Missouri and back to his former slave life. There's just things like that in here that are really interesting. Do we think anybody's going to come down to the Jackson County Historical Society and research legal briefs and things out of these books? No. But they're valuable for other things. So I just thought that was a really neat reason for us to have them. Okay, then I got all confused, which happens often. because there was another volume 1, and I'm like, okay, Kathy, why are there 2 volume 1s? So then Kathy had to explain to me that there was volume 1 from the territory of Iowa, there was volume 1 from the state of Iowa. So this book is from the state of Iowa. And so it just, it just kind of, and the very first case in this book, the defending attorney, the defense attorney is our Platt Smith. So there's just a lot of Jackson County stuff in these books. They're pretty fantastic. Even though they weren't in the log cabin like I hoped. Okay, I wanted to read you the little preface, and Kathy had to point this out to me too. I tried to get Kathy to give this brown bag lunch, but that didn't happen. Okay, in the front of the first book that I showed you, it says, preface to the second edition. When the original volume of these reports was published in 1847, the legal profession of the territory of Iowa was very limited in number. Consequently, a very small edition was published. At the present time, and he's writing this in 1870, our young state contains a population exceeding 1 million people, and that is rapidly increasing. The members of the legal profession in Iowa at the time almost equal her voting population of 1847. So the population grew, but so did the lawyers, and they just didn't have enough books. So the original volume had long been out of print, and only a small portion of the profession were supplied with copies of it. So a reprint was then deemed necessary. And that's why so much time went by from this 1839 case to the time the book was finally printed. So we have a second edition, and we know that first editions are extremely rare. So if you're in antique shops, etc., looking around, just watch for that. You never know what you're going to find. Okay. So, on April 15th of 1841, now we have Bellevue, right, being the county seat. Three Jackson County commissioners were appointed to select a section of land for a permanent county seat. They chose the spot and they named the proposed town Andrew, after General Andrew Jackson, for whom the county was of course named. Andrew was created to be the county seat, and Bellevue had been the county seat since 1837, but many of the voters favored Andrew because it was centrally located. It was hard to get around back in the day. It was almost a whole day's trip to go from Maquoketa to Bellevue. You had to stay overnight before you could come back. So everybody wanted something that was centrally located. In one of our history books, for instance, and none of these history books agree, in one of our history books it says that the reason for the removal of the county seat from Bellevue was because it was retribution from the ill effects of the Bellevue War. And another says that it was because Ansel Briggs was from Andrew and Colonel Thomas Cox was from Bridgeport, and they had great political clout, so they were able to get the county seat moved nearer to them in the Andrew area. But it was decided that once Andrew could furnish a courthouse and a jail, that the move would happen, and it did, but nobody seems to know exactly when. The history books differ. I called the courthouse yesterday. I talked to so many people at the courthouse. Nobody could put their finger on when. Luann, Don's sister, researched for a long time for me, and she came up with her opinion, but nothing in writing. And that's really interesting to me. So we know that this move was going to happen as soon, and this was 1841, as soon as Andrew could furnish a jail and a courthouse, right? So by 1848, that's 7 years, 1848, Andrew had built a 30-foot by 40-foot log building just north of the public square to be used as a courthouse. Okay? So they moved in at some point. The county seat moved in. It was barely finished, and they had barely gotten moved in when the voice of the people spoke again, and the county seat returned to Bellevue. Just like that. They were hardly there at all. Records show that by October of 1848, the supervisors were again meeting at Bellevue. And by January 1st of 1849, county officers were ordered to remove all books, records, and furniture back to Bellevue. So they all went back to Bellevue. There was no jail in Bellevue. There was a jail in Andrew, not the jail, but a jail in Andrew. And so for a while, they rented a jail in Bellevue, and they used both jails, according to the books. Okay, in 1856, there was an unsuccessful vote to move the county seat to the town of Centerville. Town of Centerville. The town of Centerville was a paper town, I guess you would call it. It was to be built on the Butterworth farm just north of Andrew, but Bellevue won by a large majority, and Centerville never came into being. Fulton, Iowa. Fulton representatives put forth a proposal for the following year, but Bellevue won again. Bellevue won against Fulton by 20 votes. And the election was contested. And it was just a hot button topic. That it was contested, but it was never tried because both sides had cast so many illegal ballots, imagine that, illegal ballots, that it would have been impossible to tell who was the most guilty. So, never happened. Okay. Okay, so Andrew had built a log courthouse, right, when it was the county seat earlier. Maybe they weren't very comfortable in the log courthouse, and that's why they went back to Bellevue, I don't know. In 1861, the citizens of Andrew proposed to furnish a new courthouse and gratuitously for 5 years let the county use it if the county seat were moved back to Andrew. Wow. And so the measure carried, and the courthouse was built at a cost of $6,000, and the county government moved again to Andrew. Now this time we know it moved in 1861, the same year that the Civil War began. That's not in question. And at the end of 5 years, the building was sold to the supervisors for $2,000, and the county seat remained in Andrew for 12 years, even though in 1868, Bellevue attempted to get it back again, but they failed. So Andrew, if you remember, had 2 log jails, and the second one, Don, I think, had no doors or windows opening in the roof. The first one?
First one.
Okay, the first one. Big log building, only opening was through the roof. The jailer had to put a ladder down, and they put you in there, and they took the ladder out. That's where you stayed. Then they had a second log building, and then they built the new Andrew jail. Okay? The old jail, log cabin, I guess, was considered unstable, and in 1867, it was declared unfit for human beings. So, there was a vote, right? Go ahead.
The second jail was limestone as well.
Oh, sorry, okay.
That's fine. Well, I thought you remembered
I stand
that.
corrected? Sorry, thank you.
How many times did you visit that jail and you don't remember it?
Touche. Okay, so they had a vote, and this sounds kind of familiar too, doesn't it? They had a vote, and the voters turned down the first proposal to build a jail for $8,000. And then in 1869, that was 1867, 2 years later, they turned down a plan with a $15,000 price tag, saying that they did not want to build a palace for their prisoners. Well, the law provided that the Board of Supervisors could spend $5,000 on their own motion. So very wisely, they let a contract with men by the name of Strasser and Schlecht to build a stone jail for $5,000. And so this building, built in 1871, as you know, still stands. It's now privately owned. Kind of sad. Okay.
Well, his plan, I guess, is
Please.
to make it into a bed and breakfast, but there's structural problems with the building, so we'll see if it happens.
Okay, we'll see if the jail from way back then survives.
But it's pretty cool.
It is, it's very cool. Okay, so, there we are, the courthouse in Macokota. So our wonderful J.E. Goodnow, initiated a petition to bring the county seat to Macokota for the first time. It had been Bellevue, Andrew. First time, J.E. Goodnow petitioned to have it come to Macokota. And then, June 12th of 1873, the city of Macokota made a very risky move. They decided to build a courthouse before the election. And in order to make it legal, they had to call it, not the courthouse, they had to call it City Hall, so that the city could do this. So they purchased a lot for $8,000 and they went to work. Now this is the part that amazes me. Think of the jail and how long this process has taken to get this jail built and get this jail going. In 2020, 23, 24, in just 90 days, from the groundbreaking to the finish, this elegant building was put up. It was made of Becker bricks at a cost of $14,000. So, to me, that's amazing that they could do that. If they could do that back then, why can't they do things like that now? I just don't understand that. But I brought over for you to see, and I do hope that you will see this, because these things have to be put away and kept safe at the other buildings, so I hope you'll come up and look at this. But the Historical Society is fortunate. We have the actual blueprints for this jail. Blueprints are made out of almost indestructible paper, so I don't feel bad holding this up for you to see. It shows, it's 3 pages. It shows, and I, looking at that picture, it's hard to understand. It shows the ground floor and everything that was on the ground floor. The next page shows the first floor and everything that was located on the first floor, like the treasurer, the clerk, etc., etc. And it shows the second floor. And then it says it has a full attic and a full basement. Help? So do you see 3 floors? I don't understand.
What do you remember, Don?
Well,
When you were there?
it had two,
Thank you.
it had 2 floors, as you can see, and then the jail was in the basement because the Pizer brothers set their mattress on fire, and the building would have burned except that they had lined the ceiling
Okay.
with steel, so the fire couldn't get to the wood, it got to the steel, otherwise that building would have burned.
Okay,
then.
so we're saying that this is the first floor, right?
Ground floor.
That, no, that's
The
that's
ground floor, I'm sorry, the ground
That's the
floor.
windows to the basement,
Right.
Okay,
and
so,
then that is the ground floor, and that is the second floor, and then there's an attic above that, but it's more like a garret attic instead of
okay.
like that.
But there's full plans for a ground floor, a first floor, and a second floor. So that's what I don't understand. And a full basement.
They may not, I mean, they may not have built it according to the blueprint, because a lot of times they did it due to material shortages or whatever,
Okay.
you know.
Thank you. But please, please come and look at these. I mean, these are very, very special. That's an old building.
And second
It's
floor.
very neat.
Where was that located?
Okay, so this courthouse that we're looking at now was just south of where the present, or kind of where the south end of the present courthouse is, on the west side of 2nd Street, correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. So, and we'll talk a little more about that. As they built this courthouse, the city reserved the right to use the eastern half of the basement rooms, and they could use the very upper floor when it was not being used for court or for court purposes. Photos were circulated throughout the area, throughout the whole county, with an offer of a free 99-year lease. But people around the county, because of all that had been going on with our musical chairs courthouses, were very suspicious. And they were very surprised, and rumors were flying everywhere. And it said that hundreds of people came from all around the county to see with their own eyes that this building actually existed. Election day came, and Macokota received a majority of the votes. It said majority of 179, I don't quite know what that means. But, okay, Maquoketa also pledged, and there are many layers to this, Maquoketa also pledged that if the county seat should move here, that removal of all the records, offices, and furniture at Andrew would be made at no charge to the county. Maquoketa would move everything that had been 12 years in Andrew, would move everything here. And this was accomplished, they said, without a hitch on the 9th of November of 1873, when about 75 farmers with teams and wagons showed up there, donating their labor, and moved everything to the new courthouse. I'd like to see that happen again today. Yeah, it would have been. It would have been. Okay, in 1876, 3 years later, Andrew tried one final time to regain the seat by circulating a petition with 6,400 names, and it failed by only 2 votes. In 1901, the city deeded the property to the county for $1,250 with a stipulation that if Maquoketa ever ceased to be the county seat, that the county would be obligated to sell that property back to the city for that exact same $1,250. So a lot of thinking went into this. Then, and this description that we're going to talk about now came from H.D. Keeley. H.D. Keeley was, help me out, Roger, county attorney? He was an attorney.
He was an attorney.
Wait, he wasn't county attorney though, was he? Okay. Somehow all of the records ended up in his personal office. I don't understand how that happened. H.D. Keeley gave a very detailed description of the inside of the courthouse. And Jerry Rasmussen reprinted that in his book, The Maquoketa I Remember. So that's where some of this information comes from, okay? And he said, talking about the building that he remembered because he went there as a child with his grandfather, who was the custodian there. And he said the building itself was a big 2-story structure, some 50 foot wide and 120 foot in length. It had a full basement and a very large attic. The foundation walls and windowsills were of local limestone. The front steps were very large slabs of native rock from a nearby quarry. The building was located on the west side of 2nd Street in the space where the southern end of the present courthouse now stands. The property extended through the block all the way to Niagara Street, and it was beautiful because of all of the huge elm trees that were there. He also said, in talking about the courthouse, okay, so look at this picture of the courthouse for another angle. Okay, about 1890, so we're several years later, there was a 2-story addition put on the south side, which would be closer to the library, correct? Gotta keep me on the right track here. Closer to the library. This, and you can see the 2-story addition right here. So that was added, had no basement under it, and the first floor of this building then housed the vaults for the clerk of court and the auditor's office, and that auditor's office vault is huge and heavy, and it is in the Historical Society. And ever should we decide to move it, we're going to need everybody's help. It's very heavy. Another fun picture that we have. Okay, so this picture was not identified as being in the courthouse on the picture itself, but it's assumed that it was in the courthouse. The desks that you see here were made by Harrison and Brothers Furniture Store. They're called standing desks, I guess. And we don't know what happened to those or where those went. But if you look at this is a metal rolling bookcase. This also is at the other museum, and it's just a fantastic thing. It has, and you can't see them because he's standing in front of them, but there's room for books here. But these are long trays with wonderful rollers. And, sorry, the big, heavy legal ledgers need to be stored flat to preserve them better. And each one of those little shelves there had rollers so that the book rolled in and out really easily. So it was easy to get them in and out, saved wear and tear on the books. And so it's really quite a wonder. But it is metal, and it has gold. You can kind of see it. Here's not a good picture. Gold detailing, scrolling detailing and things, but we do have that. So, and that wasn't in the log cabin either, but it probably was at the first courthouse in Bellevue, or the brick courthouse in Bellevue. Okay, so that's the rolling bookcase. The second floor, as we said, on the second floor was the very large courtroom, and again, this is Keeley speaking, with benches on each side for witnesses and spectators. There was a walnut dividing rail between the benches and the trial area. There were also attorneys' tables, the judge's bench, the clerk's bench in the southwest corner. The jury box was along the north wall with 2 tiers upon which captains' chairs were located. And one of these is at the other building as well. In the northwest corner was a smaller room for the judge's private office, and there was a law library. Sure, these were in there this time. That's where our books were. The sheriff's office was upstairs at first, and you can see that that might not work very well. So it was moved downstairs later, and the upper stairs of the addition, where you saw the addition, the upper stairs joined the courtroom, and it served as a place for the jury to deliberate when court was in session. Another photo from the inside of the courthouse. This was in the southeast corner upstairs, and this is where at first the county superintendent of schools were. That is Superintendent Stoddard, E.G. Stoddard, in that picture, in his office there. And later, his office was moved to the annex, and we'll talk about the annex in a minute. Okay, the walnut staircase. Evidently, by all accounts, this was a beautiful, beautiful walnut carved staircase. The access to the second floor was on the east end of the building, with a wide stairway leading to a large landing, and then the second tier leading up to the second floor. It was indeed a thing of beauty. The treads, the walnut spindles, and again, these are Keeley's words. The treads, the beautiful spindles, the extra heavy handrails, all made of native walnut. And as he wrote about this, Keeley lamented that it was a shame that the company that raised the building didn't salvage anything. So Keeley himself was responsible for saving the table from the jury room, and he donated that to the Historical Society. We have that table, but we have 2 or 3 tables, and we can't tell which is which. They're all accession, but we're working on that. Asher helped with that quite a bit because he could remember practicing there, and so he was helpful. So, and then according to the book, Jerry's book, The McCulloch I Remember, he was just so sad when the courthouse was torn down and demolished, and he drove by often. And he said at one time as he was driving by, he saw this stack of walnut spindles all stacked in the yard as that staircase had been dismantled. So he stopped and he asked if he could buy some, and they sold them to him for $0.25 apiece. And he said he only bought 12 of them. He didn't know why I didn't buy them all. He only bought 12, and then he used them in the kitchen of his house. So anyway, but all the rest of it was just gone. Okay, we need to talk quickly about the annex. So this was the old building. It had long been an office building, a privately owned office building in Maquoketa. It was on the corner of Main Street and 2nd Avenue, right next to where, okay, so you can see the picture. So this is the courthouse we've been talking about. This is the annex on the corner. This is Platt Street. And this was the county yard where they had their county equipment, their trucks and their whatever later on. So this was used right up until the late 1950s, and then this building was taken down to make room for the construction of the current courthouse. And they had to build the courthouse in 2 sections, I understand, and they moved one section in, and then they demolished that section and then they moved the other section, and so it was quite a deal to get the old courthouse, whoops, the old courthouse there moved into the new courthouse, and eventually, so this was the old court, this is where the new courthouse is, and it includes this too. So it was quite an operation to get it all built, moved, torn down and everything, and coordinate that whole thing. And then we have the sad picture of raising of the old courthouse. Happened in July of 1960. The old courthouse, built in 1873, was dismantled during the summer of 1960. A Nashville man named Art Rosetsky bought the building at auction for $100. He bought the courthouse for $100. And then he was the lone bidder. No one else bid on it. The county then paid him $1,800 to raise the structure, and it was replaced with the new $410,000 courthouse that we have now, just to the north of the old courthouse site. And so that was just kind of the end of an era, and it's sad. And of course, people like me just think, why did that have to happen? I want the old courthouse back. But I wasn't one of the people that had to work there every day and climb those stairs and do all that, so, I guess. But definitely the end of an era. Does anybody have anything to add? Nancy?
I would be remiss, okay, this did not exist in our household because Mom went to Maquoketa High School, okay?
Okay.
But there was always this huge hatred of Maquoketa in Andrew. I don't know if Dawn remembers that or not, but some families could not stand Maquoketa, would not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I was older, and I said to someone, I said, why do they always hit Maquoketa so much? And I guess it was Harry Hirschman who, I don't know when, he was old when I was young. He said, well, they took the county seat from us. And they never did. I mean, I don't think it matters anymore, but when I was a kid, they had not gotten over it yet.
I wouldn't say that it doesn't matter anymore. I think you're right. There are
Does it
people
still
out-
exist?
I think so, Don. Do you think so?
It does, and
Bellevue?
Bellevue hates Maquoketa and Andrew,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and it all came back to that.
Yeah. It's just like the Civil War never ended. I mean, there's still all that emotion that goes on with the
But I
Civil
would
War.
say it's probably stronger in Bellevue.
Oh, yeah.
Because Bellevue doesn't want to come to Maquoketa for anything.
Yeah.
But like I said, it didn't exist in our household because
Right.
Mom went to Maquoketa High School.
That's a really
Oh,
good.
Marilyn could fill us in.
Please.
I was always told when I was a kid that Maquoketa people came to Andrew in the middle of the night and stole all the books and everything
Oh,
and brought
really?
them to Maquoketa.
And brought them to Maquoketa.
Yeah, so they stole the
They stole it all.
courthouse.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people that believe that. Yeah. Don? Could you listen, please?
Part of what she's saying, there's a little more to that story.
Okay, could everybody listen, please? Okay, Don?
So, when the county seat moved, Andrew expected only the contemporary materials would be moved. They didn't think all of the back history, all
The
the,
citizens of Andrew?
yes,
And the furniture probably.
and the furniture. So they thought they were just coming to pick up, like, the records that they were currently using would be moved. And because they felt, like Bellevue felt, we got some of those books upstairs from the Young Museum,
Yes.
that if they weren't using them, they belonged to Bellevue. And same way with Andrew. So they didn't exactly come in the middle of the night, but that was kind of the story that they put out to kind of get public sentiment on their side.
Okay.
Because they expected only the current records to be moved and the rest would stay at Andrew, because they belonged to Andrew.
Well, that kind of makes sense and helps you understand. Thank you. Any other comments?
No,
That's it, huh? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming to Brown Bag Lunch. Please do come and look at the blueprints. I just think they're neat. And my great discovery, my archaeological, please look at those. Because they may never come out again, or at least for quite some time. And when you're at the other building, please look at these beautiful, you can look at these books. Please look at these awesome books. And I think if we ever have time to look further in them, I think we'll find some some really neat things. So thank you for coming. Don't forget, next week, Sue Mayberry will be doing Brown Bag Lunch about telephone operators with a Valentine touch, because it'll be the day before Valentine's.